Hello, Something Guys and Gals. This is Something Guy 912 here with yet another deviation from my odd architecture series to dole out a video of my quick thoughts about Diablo 4. Diablo 4 has been an interesting roller coaster of emotions for those who continue to play it and for those who only play it out of morbid curiosity. It started with initial promise, got heady with its beta launch, cratered with Season 1's balance changes while fixing none of the concerns brought in from its beta and release, and has been trying to rekindle favor ever since then. While Season 2 was a noted improvement from Season 1, Season 3 once again caused stagnation and disillusionment to form amongst the fanbase until a more proper redressing of Diablo 4's itemization system in Season 4, and subsequently Season 5 rolled in. Which brings us to Season 6, and along with it, the DLC Vessel of Hatred, vying to change much more about Diablo 4 by utilizing things that had worked in its prior titles, having changed its pit mechanics to be more akin to the Greater Rift system in Diablo 3, introducing runes and rune words a la Diablo 2 on top of the nostalgia that the Nahantu region serves regarding notable places like Kurast and the Travancore, while keeping the more dark and gritty aesthetic of Diablo 1. Which then comes the question, what was left of Diablo's 4 identity 15 months after its initial release? It's hard to understand the philosophy of Diablo 4 from the team at Blizzard, as it has radically changed over the years since its release. I remember distinctly how the developers wanted to stray away from Diablo 4 being a power fantasy game like Diablo 3 became, with classes doing damage in the thousands of trillions back during its initial development, only to have undone that with how much the itemization of the game and the free range of Paragon points and nodes allows builds to do just that now into the Vessel of Hatred DLC. You also had the developers be stubborn about the itemization of Diablo 4, notably the worst aspect about the game in its entirety up until Season 4, where they streamlined it to function similarly to Diablo 3's itemization system. Of course, one would ask why they hadn't adopted that itemization system in the first place, but to have to crawl back to the good graces of a game they had tried to stray away from is indicative of Diablo 4 feeling less identified by its own quality and more so what it can pilfer from its prior titles. Think about it. The only notable things that have maintained, even if refined, in Diablo 4 was the Paragon system and the legendary aspect roles, which were carryovers from Diablo 3, even if Diablo 4 put much more thought into them instead of just being superfluous. Even the Whisper Cache system is a reskin of Diablo 3's bounty system. While Diablo 4 has the open world nature of its game over its prior titles, it's an open world that exists only as a means to an end, as with the frequency of free teleport to dungeons, players, and what have you, along with waypoints, ultimately subverts it. In fact, it's more frustrating to have to manually travel to a place in order to activate a waypoint that for some reason has yet to be rectified into Season 6 of this game, since people are only paying attention to the GPS system of the minimap than the world around them. Back during Season 2 of Diablo 4, I wanted to make a video that went into the notion of the developers having to play catch up with not only the esteem of the prior Diablo games, but of its competition, like with Path of Exile or Torchlight. That with how much they shoot themselves in the foot that they constantly have to go back to the drawing board before they can build upon a already strong foundation. While it is great to see runes from Diablo 2 return, even if their use isn't as nearly as involved as it was before, and that the developers are taking pages from their prior games that worked, it also does leave little on the table for what Diablo 4 was even trying to be as its own game. You can even see how this delicate balance bleeds in as, while materials are ever more plentiful per player experience, simultaneously cause them to be superfluous as a result. You can get gold into the hundreds of billions and be meaningless unless a player is trading a very sought after item, whereas before these changes, gold was quite scarce along with materials. You had boss encounters and boss-like enemies that were quite the struggle for players to overcome, whether or not they were actually balanced, but now you have players who can one-tap Andariel or Duriel, be fed a procession of gear that will be sent to the glue factory, only to do it all over again, because the developers can't decide whether Diablo 4 should be more of a intimate struggle or just a vacant noise of dopamine hits. Some may argue that Diablo 4's changes, even if it has stripped away any of its notable identity, were necessary into the longevity of the game as a whole, and I say this longevity wouldn't be needed if Diablo 4 wasn't being fed through a live service schema that often puts more thought into the many microtransaction bundles it projectile vomits at you over the game or its story, which the latter has been middling at best and the former been transmogrified depending on the dev team working on it. Some may argue that what Diablo 4 had to offer on its surface wasn't worth keeping, and that all they could do was go back to their hallmarks, and while true, means that Diablo 4 is nothing more than a rerun of the classics. And if I wanted a rerun of the classics, I would play something like Diablo 2 Resurrected, which not only maintained much of its hallmarks, but added plenty of quality of life improvements, as well as new stuff of its own to shake up the format. My overall point of this video is that I think the devs behind Diablo 4 should be more willing to experiment with things that may not work, but show promise and refine them into something that can be great for the long term. While this game was mocked to hell and back even after its death, I think we can learn a lot from Concord's failure to launch, chiefly that its main failing was that it only knew to iterate upon trends rather than innovate on them. Such things like the Infernal Hordes introduced in Season 5, the introduction of the Kuros Undercity, and the Dark Citadel raid in Vessel of Hatred are welcome additions that aren't reliant on nostalgia nor immediately perfect on launch so that the devs can see what does or doesn't work with it. Such things with live service games do open up opportunities to see what works or doesn't, but thus far, many of the mechanics in the prior seasons have not materialized, save for a few unique items based on the Malignant Hearts in Season 1, and a few legendary aspects based on the vampiric powers from Season 2. I also think the devs really need to put their line in the sand as to what Diablo 4 is trying to be and what it's trying to aim towards, rather than beating around the bush as to whether it's going to get out of control with the power creep of its items, classes, and mob density, or make it a much more personal, intimate, and difficult struggle. But if the main flavor of this DLC is anything to go by, I fear that Diablo 4 is not so much Diablo 4 anymore, but in reality, Diablo 1, 2, 3, 4.